Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. With me today is entrepreneur and Abraham Hicks fan Louis D'Souza. This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. Marie is taking this week off. She will hopefully be back again next week, but that's all right because we're going to have a lot of fun today with our special guest, Ruhina Mehra. I like this. She's an authenticity coach. I mean, if you're going to be a coach of something, why not authenticity? Being the real deal. I like that. Where'd that come from for you?
Thank you. I mean, to be honest, I feel like that's the crux of one of the bigger issues that we're having, like universally at the moment. People aren't really connected to who they really are because we're so focused on the external pressures around us, our family, our peers, our society. And we've forgotten, that there's different ways to live. And living the way you want to, like, really is living authentically. So my goal is really to connect people to that part of themselves.
I love that. So welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us today. And why don't you give Louie and me a little bit of a biography of you? How did you get to be the authenticity coach? How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, I'd love to. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. I apologize for any background noise. It seems like today is the day that the area around me decided to do some construction.
Hey, nothing new around here. No problem.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I actually I came down this path through like a series of events. Growing up, I come from a South Asian background. Growing up in the U.S., like child of immigrants, I actually moved to the U.S. when I was 9, so I'm an immigrant myself. I was able to blend into society relatively well, like transition pretty easily. That wasn't an issue. But I realized that now that I took on at a young age the expectations of other people around me, very internally. I was a very sensitive kid, so I was really trying to, please my parents, my family, make sure I did a good job, make sure like everyone, I was doing the thing that was the correct, quote unquote, correct thing to do. Going to school to get a high achieving job and making a good amount of money, good status, all of that. So yeah, I like I said, I did all the things I was supposed to do. Thought I wanted to become a doctor. I know that now. I thought that because it was told to me at a very young age. I remember being like 4 years old and being told, "Oh, like you can become a doctor, or you should become a doctor." I don't remember the exact phrasing, but it was something that happened young enough that it was ingrained into my system. And yeah, growing up like this, the path I followed, and to college, got a biology degree, did all the things. And then towards the end of college, I started realizing this doesn't feel right. I was shadowing a lot of doctors. I was in the hospital systems, like shadowing people. And it's like, I still don't, like, I want to help people. Like, I always knew that. That was the reason I, went down this path. And it's just like, there's just so much red tape in the hospital system, to be honest. And I felt like I wasn't going to be helping people the way I wanted to. So I went back to school, got my master's in health administration. Still thought I was helping people, went down the corporate path, worked for several years, and I was like, man, there has to be more to life than this.
So I hadn't quite hit the right spot yet. Okay.
Yeah. So I started exploring things about 4 years ago then, and just started looking at my options. Like, what does it mean to me to help people? And what I love when I help people is just like one-on-one conversations, really getting deep with people, understanding what their needs are, understanding who they are. I didn't know this for a long time, but I was subconsciously psychoanalyzing everybody that I met, just like trying to understand them as people, like all the time. And so, yeah, understanding all of that about myself, then I started doing coaching courses and taking classes, and the law of attraction also entered my life around that time. And I also did it just to lift up my own vibration, live more authentically. I realized just like, if I want good things to come into my life, I have to be true to myself. Like, I can't expect them to just happen. So started following that path. Long answer to your question.
Hey, we give lots of long answers around here. You're well in here. You're doing very, very well. When you're talking about how your family expectations led you originally down the medical path, it kind of reminds me a little bit of what my father thought for me. My father thought I'd be a minister. He thought I'd make a great minister.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, never resonated with me at all. Just not even on the map. Yeah. But even with that, I remember it wasn't so much pressure because my parents really didn't pressure us. But you're right. There was sort of an expectation that went into that. It was sort of unstated.
Yeah.
And I mean, I mean, my background probably was not quite the same as yours in the sense that, and I've heard this many times from people with Asian backgrounds. There's more than just an expectation; it's a strong expectation. Like, you will do this. This is the way you're going to go.
Yeah.
So I didn't have that, but it almost didn't matter because every time that I was focusing in some way, which not very often, by the way, growing up, I didn't have any clear idea of what I wanted to do. But every time that I did, for a moment or two, focus on what it is I wanted to do, my dad would kind of redirect over to, a career in theology.
Oh.
And if I had been more influenced that way, that could have been really confusing. That could have been very, very confusing. I imagine that created a lot of confusion for you too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't say that I was confused because I thought that's just who I was. It shaped my life. Like, it defined my entire childhood.
Oh, okay.
And it was also, I mean, I was confused in hindsight. If I look back now, I was definitely confused, but at the time I didn't know it. And also, it wasn't just the family pressure. It was just the unsaid pressure of the society and the expectation of the background that I come from, because I was surrounded by South Asian people. And in my community, that's just what everyone was doing. Like, you were going to school to become a doctor, like maybe a lawyer, maybe an engineer, most likely a doctor. Everyone's about pre-med. It was just like common. So it wasn't even like, oh, I can explore the arts. That wasn't an option in my own mind. Like, I didn't even know, like, oh, I can be creative, if I really wanted to. And like, that didn't make sense to me at the time because it didn't necessarily provide a stable path to financial, success, which is the end goal, especially for immigrant families, because they've worked so hard to bring their kids over here and provide a new life for them. So ultimately what they want is to see their kids safe, stable, just, surviving.
Interesting. You should mention the creativity piece, because when I was in first grade, my mom met with my teacher for what they call the parent-teacher conference. And I did very, very well in school throughout the time I was there, relatively effortlessly. But the teacher felt like she had to balance things off a bit. So she said to my mom that I would never be very creative.
Oh, that's so sad.
Which, by the way, turned out to not be true. But it took me a while to come to believe it, because I had that expectation. Like, okay, you're never going to be creative. All right, I guess I'm really not. I must be very logical. So I stuck with logical.
Yeah, and that's what I thought of myself too, to be honest. Like, I am very logical and analytical by nature, but and so I shut down any creativity. I was like, oh, I'm just not a creative person. Like, I don't create the way I would see other people, like making art and painting or whatever it is. I took it very literally. But I've come to realize that there's so much more to creativity than that. Like, I can use my voice to create. I can be on this podcast with you, and we can create this beautiful conversation that we're having. There's so many ways to be creative, and that's been a learning process for me as well. And I even remember at a young age, I always have loved working with my hands. So little things like crafty, like sewing, things like that. I remember being told, oh, you're so good at sewing, you could become a surgeon. So everything all paths led to doctor.
Yeah. Interesting how they turned that into surgery. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Number of different possibilities. No, sewing is surgery. Got it.
Yeah,
all right.
Who would think?
Apparently they did.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
So, okay. Louis, as I'm thinking about what I know about your background, and obviously you're listening to what's going on here, I'm asking myself, normally I can like say, okay, I see how Louis would actually connect to this. I'm not seeing how you would respond or react to this. When you're thinking about hearing Ruhina's story, how's it affecting you? How's it impacting
you? So, as a child, I was very focused on understanding who I was from the age of 8. Consciously, I said to my mom, and it's a story I've said many times, I said to my mom, what is truth, love, and God really about? And she said,
right. I remember.
So, it's been, to be authentic has been pretty much my prime modus operandi from as young as I remember. And it's almost difficult, as one of the questions I wanted to ask you is how would you tell somebody they're unauthentic so that you can help them become authentic?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually, because that manifests in different ways in people's lives. It might be that people are struggling, like it might be what I went through, which is I found out through career. I was just like, I am so unhappy, but why? I don't understand why. And so I had to really dig deep and realize, oh, these aren't my real desires for myself. they were other people's thoughts and hopes and dreams for me that I just happened to take on at a young age. And now I have to figure out what I want for myself. So it stems from other avenues. I doubt most people are just walking around like, I'm not being authentic to myself. Usually of some kind. If it's in relationships, that happens often. I see that as well. People are really like people that are, again, most likely sensitive people that have a tendency to people please. They just want, people to feel good around them. They forget their own selves in relationships. So then they're unhappy in relationships, but they don't know why. They forget that they're just giving so much to other people. Of course, like there's other little things like, there's something I look at called the wheel of life. There's a whole circle of things. So like even if it's like religion, say for somebody, but they're unhappy in their religion and then they just like don't know why. Realizing that maybe that's not what they really believe. Like maybe they've been taught to believe something really strongly their entire life, but they're not resonating, but they don't put that together. It's just the core unhappiness that will eventually bring people to start asking the questions and then maybe get some support to leading them to living a more authentic life.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Authenticity is key if you want to be confident.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And that was the word that just popped into my head too. Just, if you want to be able to live without worrying about what people think about you, living, as I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's what somebody said to me yesterday. It's an energy class I go to once a month, and the lady said, well, the thing about you, Louis, is you just really don't care what other people think about you. And Walt would say, yeah,
it's true. Absolutely true. Yeah.
And she said, that's a great advantage. But, there is another side of it. And that is, I care very deeply what I think and what I believe and where I'm going. And, if somebody's very close to you, sorry, let me have a quick drink. If somebody's very close to you, like my wife, etc., and my kids, I do care a lot more what they think than certain other people out there, internet people. So, it really is a journey about being clear about what you really want and moving forward with it, and then creating your reality.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I mean, well, first of all, that's an amazing ability if you've had that, especially at a young age. I think that's something I definitely am always striving to do for myself now, is to care much less about what other people think of me. The point that comes up is usually if I do, because we're human, we want to do things for other people. We want to make the people that we love happy. I always ask myself sometimes, like, if there's something that comes up, if I do this thing with this person, is it conflicting directly with my values and my desires for myself? And that's where I will sometimes draw the line. If I have to go out of my way, because it might be something small, like, can you watch, if someone asked me for a favor, can you watch my kid for me this weekend? I love kids. I would love to do it. If I have nothing going on, sure. But then if I think, do I have other time commitments I've made for myself? Do I have anything going on that I've planned that I really want to do for myself? Because my instinct would be to say yes, because it makes me happy, and like I'd love to make you happy that way too. But then I think about my life and what I have going on, and just realize, like, is this in direct conflict with other things I have going on for myself, and then make the decision.
Yeah. So, it's a journey to become really, really clear about where you're going and what you want, and then working it into your life, like you were saying there, finding out, is this in alignment of who I am and where I'm going at the moment, or isn't it? And that is very important.
Yeah. Yeah, and it sounds simple, but I'm starting to learn that a lot of people haven't necessarily taken the time to become that self-aware. And then, so the self-awareness, I think, is one component of it. And then the second component of it is the confidence to go after, the goals that you have. So I feel like it's multifaceted. But yeah, I completely agree with what you were saying.
So basically, you have a core belief and a core values. Are you happy to talk about those?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, my core beliefs and values are, it's very simple for me. It's about being true to who I am. I mean, of course, there are basic tenets to me, like, what I think is important. My relationships in my life are very important to me. Not harming anyone or anything around me is very important to me, whether that's emotionally, mentally, physically. um, Being kind, and then also just helping people and understanding people and giving back to people as much as I can. That's a really, really deep value of mine that I always had an inkling of at a young age, but I just
Mhm.
didn't know what path to take to fully follow that. I tried it with the whole like doctor route and like healthcare, all the things that made logical sense to my brain, but I
Mm.
didn't take the time to really sit down and try the other things. Um, like going into the mental health space, which is where I am now, which is what I'm really, really passionate about. And some people, need a little bit more time. Like I needed the growth and the experience, like just the exposure, I think, to the world to understand what my options were like. Sometimes you don't have that chance when you're younger. And then another value of mine that's really important to me is being willing to grow and evolve as I learn new things about myself and the world. I think when people choose to see things only from their perspective and stick in that and remain rigid, that's when people really hit walls and like have difficulty in
Mm.
life.
Yeah, as I'm said quite a few times, how much I know is fairly big, but how
Hmm.
much I don't know is infinite.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
It does leave a
So,
little room for improvement.
but the more you think, you don't really know much, and you can learn from everybody. Like I can learn from you, and all the other people who come on the show. When you open like that, you really start creating the bond and the relationship between learning and growing from with each other. And if you think you know it all, then you kind of block off half of the conversation and half of the flow, and it just doesn't go anywhere.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a layer of ego shedding that happens every time I meet someone new and I understand their perspective of the world, because it's something I haven't even thought of. A lot of times we don't even know how to live outside of our own realities until we, at least for me, I meet other people and I'm trying to understand where they're coming from usually, and I'm always learning about how they think about life, and it's constantly taking me down a notch, like taking me down a peg.
Yep, that's going to happen to all of us, I think, at one time or another. I want to go back to something else that you were bringing up at the very beginning. You mentioned that you have the background as a Asian American or a Southeast Asian American,
Mhm.
and I've had conversations along the same general lines with a number of male Southeast
Mhm.
Asian Americans. And
Mhm.
one of the things they talk about is not only are there these kinds of expectations that get passed along from family and culture and so forth, but that they're particularly intense on males simply because the male is expected to not just follow the path, but to excel at it. It's got to be, whoa, this one's going to just break through and take over the world and so forth. And I'm kind of curious to what degree, as a female coming from that same background, have you experienced the same thing?
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I don't know if I've ever directly encountered that or had that conversation with enough South Asian or Indian. My background is Indian.
Mm-hmm.
Men who specifically said that enough that it sounds different to the female experience.
Okay.
My experience, it's been pretty much equal, but I could be wrong. Again, I'm living in my own reality. So I mean, I can speak to my, years growing up. I actually have a younger brother, and the expectations for both of us, I would think, were pretty similar. My parents were very fair. I know in some homes, there's a little bit more of a favoring towards the male child, which was not the case in my home. My parents were very equal, very fair. I was more sensitive, so I took on all of those. My brother was a little bit less sensitive, I think, a little bit more rebellious, as happens with younger children as well.
Mm-hmm.
So he was more prone to testing the boundaries and the limits where I was trying to stay within them. Um, And I think he took the time to really understand a little bit more of what he wanted at a younger age. So when he made a decision to become an engineer versus a doctor, because the doctor expectation was there for him as well,
Mm-hmm.
he chose to make the decision. Um, my parents didn't have so much of a choice; they had to accept it because he was very clear and confident in his decision. So they were like, "All right, this is what you want to do. We understand it." I was less clear, so the pressure that I took was probably like self-made, like internalized pressure that I took on. So again, my experience is different. I do actually often hear the opposite now that I'm thinking about it
Okay.
from men, because there's a lot of like, especially like the firstborn males, they're like the, prime of, or not prime, sorry, they're the gift of our lives for like the
Mm.
mothers and fathers. We want like to dote everything on them. So there's a lot of like mama's boys that I hear about. Again, not the case of my family. My family was very, very fair. Um, so yeah, but it's interesting that you've mentioned that and heard about that.
Well, actually, as I'm thinking, well, first of all, Asia is a really large continent, and the countries that I've heard about this phenomenon really being a big thing is mostly like Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, China, that kind of region there, but especially the Southeast Asian. That's where I've heard that phenomenon being a really really big thing. It may not have been as big as say India, Pakistan, Myanmar, whatever. That it may not have been
As
played
prevalent.
out as much as prevalent. Yeah, that's probably the better way to say it.
Yeah, yeah. No, but that is fascinating to think that. And looking back in my like high school years, there were not very many South Asians and not very many Indian or Pakistani kids, but there were a
Mm-hmm.
lot of East Asians, so lots of Chinese, Korean, both male and female. And I mean, our valedictorians were all East Asian. I remember male. So I don't know if that fits into what you're saying, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either. I remember one of my very first guests. I've been doing the show now for about 10 and a half years. And my first year, one of my very first guests was a gentleman from, I think he was from Vietnam. And we really talked about this topic extensively. I remember that distinctly, even to this day, and how literally it led him on a path that was so self-destructive that by the time he was 40, he was a multimillionaire, massively successful, and about ready to commit suicide because the pressure to go in a direction that really didn't fit who he was so intense. And he actually wrote a book about basically stop paying attention to your culture and follow your internal heart.
Yeah, that's really sad, and I'm glad he was able to understand that. And I would say don't think my situation was quite as extreme, but I was probably headed in that direction actually, growing up without realizing it, and was in a very similar situation. So yeah, it's a hard way to live, really, when you're just following the expectations of whatever it is, culture, society, parents, family, peers, any of it. I mean, this is a different topic, but even kids these days with social media, I can only imagine the kind of pressures that are coming at them, like left, right, center, all the time. Like I cannot. It's difficult to be a teenager, I think at any point, but with constant access to so much information and to so much about what your friends are doing, to what other people are doing, I can only imagine like how it must be to live now, and like how much confusion must be created and how much chaos must be going on internally.
It's a great point. I don't think we really understand yet just what a large influence social media is. I mean, people are very aware of it. Don't get me wrong. People criticize, spending too much time on social media and it's gonna tear these people up and so forth. But I don't think we really grasp yet what it's like to grow up with that as your not just your influence, your life. I mean, a lot of kids these days, there's really not much of a life outside of school and social media. That's it. That's their lives.
No, completely. I mean, I don't want to judge anyone for doing this, but I walk around everywhere now, and people of all ages, forget teenagers, but everyone's taking their first phone out. That's the first thing, because everything is now about the visual and the aesthetic. And there is such a keen sense of, I have to put this thing out into the world before I do anything else. Which, if it makes you happy, I think that's okay. I just don't think people question why it's making them happy. and why they aren't more focused on the experience rather than that momentary like dopamine hit or whatever it is that's happening.
Mm. So when now you're a coach, when
Yes.
people come to you to ask to work with you, give us an idea of what their most common path is that's leading them to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had people come to me for different reasons. And I assume, again, because I am South Asian, the South Asian community tends to relate to someone of their own culture. So I've had a few people come in from there. And I've seen people primarily coming in for the problems that I've already mentioned, which is relationship with their career, relationship with a romantic partner, but that's not been as like a huge one, but and relationship to their family unit is a big one. So relationship to their parents, they don't know how to draw boundaries. Sometimes people are like living with their parents after school, or they're still trying to get themselves set up financially, and it's a little. I can't say I know what the experience is like to live. If you're not a South Asian person, like living with your family, but with the South Asian unit, there's always questions typically like, where are you going? What are you doing? How's life? Are you following your goals? Are you like going, like, are you making money? Like these questions. Are you following our expectations? If you're not, like you need to come to our family events. Like it's a lot harder I've seen to say no for people because, and they're afraid to say no because they're taught if you say no, then you're not loved anymore. So that's a core one that I've seen a lot of. And people, take time to understand that and to learn how to say no. But I've seen people who've been able to get out of that cycle, and that's really, really fulfilling.
Do you also find that people coming to you are, like so many people in the world today, unfamiliar with going within? Because we live in a world, first of all, that encourages people to get their answers externally, but
Yeah.
it also seems to be that people have kind of latched onto that in cultures everywhere, and I'm kind of imagining the same thing has happened with the people who you talk to.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people I talk to, they in theory want to, do the work. They want to get to the other side, but they don't realize, what it takes. And that is asking a lot of why. Why do I do this? And then I also have to help them shift their perspective. Like they might know that there's other options, but they don't really believe those are viable options. I might have to say, oh, yes, you can live, a successful life if you're not following this career trajectory your parents have set out for you. And they might say, yeah, sure, but I have to like help them understand that it's really viable. Like yes, you may be judged by them, yes, you may be judged by other people, but does it really matter? Are you judging yourself for doing this? And if you are, why are you doing that? And we have to undo that judgment and help them realize that you're worthy of and like love and just existing because you are alive. You don't need anyone else's validation or love to prove that you are worthy in this lifetime. So
Yeah, that's a big piece, isn't it? We across all cultural boundaries that I can think of, we have a tendency to equate judgment with external answers.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, judgment is all because judgment is like society feeding us, rules, boundaries, things we've like things we've created for ourselves, boxes that we've put ourselves in. That all comes from the outside. So it's a lot of unlayering, a lot of undoing that, a lot of realizing that none of that at the end of the day is important as long as you care about who you are as a person. So I often start actually with a question. It's a very simple question with my clients and with workshops and things I do, which is just, who are you? And I have people list out, like write it down, like, who are you? What do you think you are? And usually it's, it's external facing things. I'm a doctor, I'm a sister, I'm a, whatever it is, I'm a child, I'm all these things. And I'm like, but who were you before then? Before any of that labeling came into play in your lifetime, who were you then? And people struggle with that. Like, I don't know. I was a baby, but that's the core of what I'm trying to get to.
It's an interesting exercise. It's very broad. It's very open-ended, just to answer the question, who are you? But it also, like you say, it kind of redirects your attention to within, to who you feel about yourself, how you feel about yourself, and who you feel yourself as the person inside. And we don't often answer that question. We don't often
We don't know how to answer that question a
Yeah.
lot. I think that's the bigger issue. We don't know how to answer, who am I outside of all of these, labels and paths that I've been going down my entire life. So there's an undercurrent of spirituality in my work. I don't like to push it on anyone that is uncomfortable or comes from a different background, but there's an undercurrent of I am pure love if I choose to see myself that way.
I'm curious also to know, as clients work with you, where do you see them crossing the river? I guess is the best way the best way I can think of to say it. Where do you see them all of a sudden make their shift and start redirecting inside and discovering whatever it is they're discovering when they're doing that?
Yeah, I think it depends on the situation that they're coming from. I would say the shift usually happens maybe like 4 to 5 months in, because when they come in, they're coming in again for this outward goal that they're usually trying to get at. And then a few months in, I've seen some people have like a light bulb moment of, oh, it's not about what I'm doing that's wrong. It's the perspective of how I'm looking at myself and how I'm looking at my options that isn't working. And sometimes it takes a little longer than that too. It might take a year or two, to get there. But with the majority, I've seen it come around then. It's like a perspective shift that comes in when they've tried everything they think they can, and suddenly they're starting to hit like the wall. Like there's nothing else left. What's the difference here? What's wrong? And so again, I'm guiding them and helping them understand, here are your options. You can choose to either fight them, or you can choose to look at it without judgment, which is the beauty again of everything, I think.
I have to admit, when I asked that question, I had Louis in mind, because he has been like a consummate lifelong learner who followed his own path. He realized he wasn't going to get the answers from the leading figures in his life that he wanted to get, so he had to find them on his own. And he's told us many times all the different ways that he just became absolutely passionate about that. So, I mean, Louis, correct me if I'm wrong, relatively young age, you just kind of, you dove in and there was no stopping you at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I went to the local town library as a young boy, and I poured through all the books, and I came to the conclusion at a young age that the mind was the answer. So I started reading all these mind-bending books, and they completely turned me off. And then they landed up in psychology, and you know what I think of that.
Yes, we do know that.
So, and then, started to go into hypnosis and self-hypnosis, and I had all my journeys into that. And then after that, it was, all the religions. I went through all the religions, and I got a basic overview of all of them. And then, I delved around in the mystery schools and all the rest of it. And I was trying to find answers anywhere and everywhere. And so the journey led me down many, many, many routes but I also landed up with the law of attraction. I'm guessing you also bumped into Abraham Hicks.
Yeah. That everything happened for me at the same time. My year of clarity was a few years ago, and it was when I realized, I can't continue down this path anymore. And I started working with a coach myself, actually. She didn't really put this out there strongly, but she was a spiritual teacher and guide at the time. But I don't think that's how she was marketing herself. But she would make little suggestions here and there about reading certain books. And I started looking up some things about the law of attraction. And then I got a book just randomly one day and started reading it. And then I just couldn't stop, because my whole worldview changed in the matter of a few days when I read that book. And then I was just Googling every day, something new, what can I learn? What do I need to do for myself to if the law of attraction is real, which I really do strongly believe in it. How do I shift my life to get the things that I want? And the first answer for me was, I have to, stop following this path that I thought I wanted to follow for my entire life, and go into what I really care about. So it definitely impacted my life deeply.
Mm-hmm.
And in hindsight, also just looking back at my entire life, I've realized I would always ask, why? Things always seemed really difficult growing up for me, from my perspective. It's why are things so difficult? And I realized it's because the things that were difficult are the things I didn't really, truly, purely want for myself. The things that happened, I noticed, were always the things that I deep, deep down wanted and didn't pay attention to, but they always happened. So that I found really intriguing. And I started to try to understand that a little bit more.
So which religion were you brought up in?
I was brought up in Hinduism. Yeah, which is, I will say, has a lot of direct correlations to Western spirituality, quote unquote spirituality, like the Western spiritual world. I think like between colonialism and a lot of other factors, like the modernization of India has made Hinduism a little bit more literal, and people tend to follow it more as a cultural thing, a little bit more seriously than what it was, as the way it was written, because it was written as these texts called the Vedas many, many thousands of years ago that slowly transitioned to what it is now. But in its origins, the law of attraction and manifestation, things like that, are mentioned, maybe not directly, like those words aren't mentioned in the text, but there are mentions of, if you meditate within yourself, you can will anything into your desire, like anything in your desire into your reality, rather.
Yeah, so there's a journey for you from Hinduism to more your own belief.
I would say yes, but I still consider myself a Hindu because of these roots that Hinduism has, that are like, again, yoga, Ayurveda, all these things that have become very mainstream. I've actually done a lot of research on this. If you look at the history, originally Hinduism was just live any way you like. And there's no right way to honestly also be a Hindu. There are many deities. They are all manifestations of one overarching higher power, whatever you might want to call it. And Hinduism can be followed in many, many ways. So I don't know if you want to deep dive.
Go ahead. And from what I've learned recently about Hinduism, is you can really make your own god.
It's because there's only one. At the core of Hinduism, there is only one. I don't even like to say
you
God.
Can use a symbol or something to represent the one.
Yes, absolutely.
So in a sense, you can make your own god, which is something I didn't quite understand until recently, which was quite interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, even things like the word Om, people chant that to really connect to themselves and to whatever higher power it is. It is not about, I mean, some people, of course, choose, there are temples everywhere, there are deities, but each temple, if you really look into the history of Hinduism, each god, each deity is a manifestation of some part of our lives, is a manifestation. It's just broken down to make things easier for the human brain to understand, and the mythology exists so that we can understand life from a different perspective. It's less about, like, if I pray to this god, we have a god of strength, for example. His name is Hanuman. And it's less about if we pray to the god of strength, then I'm going to get strength. It's more that this is a way for us to channel our intention and focus it on what we're looking for. And then we have a physical, manifestation of it. We can look at it that way. It just makes it easier for us to digest as people.
So when you understand the law of attraction, you understand that focusing is one of the prime, most important aspects to manifesting your destiny.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I mean, destiny is an interesting word, kind of destination, which means you're just focusing on getting to where you want, really. But when you're getting to where you want, you call it destiny. But when you're getting to where you don't want, you call it fate.
I love that.
That's so interesting.
It's quite true. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
And what I've learned from the yogis is that when you focus, when you get control of your physical body, you'll be able to control, say, 15 to 20% of your destiny. When you control your mind, when you're really clearly focused and you got clarity, then you can control about 60% of your destiny. And this is the thing the yogi says, when you focus on your when you got control over your energies, you pretty much got control over your whole life,
Hmm. Yeah.
which is really interesting because once you understand the law of attraction, it is really all about learning to focus for longer than 14 seconds on one subject,
Hmm.
which is
No.
not easy for most humans.
y- Yes, I completely agree. I mean, I do yoga relatively regularly, and that is still something that I, struggle with. I'll catch myself in the middle of sun salutation or whatever routine I'm doing, and realize that I'm not even in the present moment. And it takes a lot of willpower to
Yeah, you
really.
haven't answered that text yet, have you?
No, oh no, you see it. No, I haven't answered it.
Yeah.
No, I didn't notice it.
Yeah, you're in the middle of the yoga posture and you think, oh, I haven't answered so and so.
Yeah, yeah. So it's definitely, I mean, even growing up, when I think about it, working out, things like that, people always tell you if you push yourself, you can do anything you want. It's all a mental game. So it's about harnessing your energy and bringing it back to the present moment, which is what we're all learning about now. I
Mm.
think, we hear about meditation constantly. It's being told to us all the time, and I think it's such a wonderful thing. But I often wonder if people don't even realize like what the purpose of meditation is, because I hear so many questions like, "Am I meditating correctly? Am I doing it right? What is
Yeah, I
happening?"
mean, most people, I mean, the only time I ever started to understand meditation was with Abraham Hicks. So Abraham Hicks said that, you know, your mind is often thinking about things that you don't want.
Mhm.
All right. But if you stop your thought altogether, what happens is your natural if cells and your entire vibration of your body wants to raise up to be a higher vibration. And if you've got no negative thoughts, it automatically raises up.
Mhm.
So when you're stilling your mind, it's like, all those negativity is like pushing a cork under the water. But the cork's natural position is to be on top.
Mm.
So when you take away that negativity, when you stop thinking, the cork floats to the top. And that's really, once I understood that about meditation, everything changed for me. It was incredible.
Interesting. I think for me, a big part of it is the connection to the body. And that was hard for me to understand because I was told by so many people, like, you live in your head, you've got to get out of your head. And I didn't know what that meant. I really had no idea for a long time. It wasn't until I had a few experiences while meditating where I realized that I could just like feel my entire body so deeply.
Hmm.
That's when I understood what it meant to be grounded. And that's not even something I can explain properly or teach someone. You just have to experience it to understand it. Um, but
What
that's
was it, a vibrational thing?
when I say vibration, I don't mean like my body was literally vibrating. Or when
Hmm.
you say vibration, do you mean like
A perception that your whole body is singing in a way.
yeah, somewhat. I felt more aware of my heart, my like
Okay.
chest area. It's just
You
like
could feel
it
your
was the
heartbeat.
awareness of my
Was it
physical.
very physical, like a
Yes.
heartbeat, or was it?
Yes, it was the
Mm,
awareness of my physicality in a way that I don't necessarily feel on a day-to-day
mm,
basis because I'm always up here, always like, what's the next thing? How do we move forward? So when I take the time to really drop deep in, and I just do quick things to help with that. If I realize that I'm moving too much in my head, I'll just take a few minutes to just like feel my fingers, feel my toes. And when I say that, I don't even mean like think about them. I'm just like, what does this finger feel like in its like most minuscule form? And I'll
mm.
really pay attention to it. And then like, just like really, really paying attention to as much of my body as I can. It sounds basic, but there's a lot of effort required to do that. And most of us are really not living in our bodies, which is a big part of the reason so many people have so many issues, is because we're
Mm.
having all of these emotions and they're bypassing our physical selves. And then the emotions just stay stuck because we're not releasing them.
Yeah, I mean, we chose to come into this life with a body,
Hmm.
and it is very much part of us, and yet we don't pay too much attention to it at all. I mean, I remember as a young kid, I used to spend a lot of time studying my own body because I was a sick kid. So I needed to learn how to get well. So found a book on my mother's bookshelf called Body Reflexology by Mildred Carter. And I literally started massaging my own hands. And, I had asthma and all the rest of it. So strangely enough, the lungs were very sore, and I literally massaged out all the pain in my hands and feet. And it was body reflexology. So the points also in your head and your ears and your tongue. So it was just a journey for me to really get into my body, really get to understand it. I went out and did a number 2 in the bush, and I turned around and I studied it for hours. What's it made up of? How does it look? What does it smell like? And that memory's still with me. So even today I turn around and have a look. What does it look like? What does my urine look like? It's the whole thing about understanding my body is absolutely key point in my life. So it's just been a journey for me to really get to understand the body. And now I work a lot with energy, and then I see how the energy affects the physicality, which is incredible. That's really an amazing place to be, is to really understand to get to understand a bit of the energies of the body.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's the key thing so many of us have forgotten in our journeys. We're starting, I've seen, at the mind, because all of our issues are right now are usually related to the mind. Many people, of course, do have, physical ailments and whatnot. But generally society right now is
Yeah,
driven.
but those physical ailments come from the mind.
Yes, yes.
First it's mental, and then it's physical. Well, first it's energy, and then it's mental, and then it's physical.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
the further, what I discovered along the way is that the further away you work from the physical, the more powerful it is. So if you work on the energy level, it's more powerful than the mental. If you work on the mental level, it's more powerful than working directly on the physical.
Interesting. I am curious about that because I've always, again, as a sensitive person, I've been relatively connected to my body. I like to think, at least. I could be wrong about that. And I only say that because in watching myself and watching other people around me, I am highly sensitive to like things like putting caffeine in my system. Just if like I take medicine, like this, whatever the side effects are, and like in small print, like those happen to me. Other people don't seem to experience things to the same degree. So I've always been very aware of my body for that reason. So I try to be as mindful as possible of what I'm doing to it and putting in it. But I think you're right. I think for the majority of people, it is more energetic and then mental and then, the body.
You see, for most of society is focusing on food to heal you or something physical. Very, very rarely are they moving into the mental arena where, if you change your thoughts, your physical body will change. That even connection isn't even there very clearly for a lot of people. And then when you look at it from an energetic point of view, well, let me break it down like this. When I was young, somebody walked up to me and they said, "Louis, you are what you eat." And I said, "Rubbish. You are what you breathe and what you and drink far more than what you eat." So they looked at me and they thought about it for a while, and they said, "How do you work that out?" I said, "Well, how often do you breathe?" I said, "Well, almost every second." So how much is your body made out of water? So 70%. So I said, aren't those factors incredibly important? Which one would you die of first if you stopped doing them? Food, liquid, or breathing? And you realize that breathing is the one you die of first, then liquid, and then food. The least important one is where society mostly focuses on. And then, of course, with the law of attraction, I realized that the mental arena was even beyond breath. And then I started to realize that there's a variation from the physical into something less physical, which is air, water, which something less physical, which is air, and something even less physical, which is mental. And then, of course, you get to the energetic, which is really means vibration, which everything vibrates. So there's nothing in any part of the universe that isn't a vibration. And you start looking at it from a very different perspective.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I don't think I've ever actively thought about how breathing might be more impactful than like the food that we're eating, for example, like you said. So that is, no pun intended, food for thought for me.
Or perhaps every pun intended. It could work either way. That's pretty cool stuff. I was also thinking about what you guys were talking about a couple moments ago about the ability or lack thereof of a human being to focus attention. And to me, there's an interesting dichotomy that goes on here. And to illustrate it, I'll point to people who are diagnosed and or labeled as being ADHD. The thing that I've noticed about ADHD people is that they're incredibly good at focusing. They just don't focus on what the authority wants them to focus.
You want them to.
Yeah, right. But the thing that they want to focus on, they're really, really good at it. You could hardly break their attention away from it. And it kind of
Elon Musk is a good example.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good example. Yeah. And what goes along with that is people do have a tendency to stay focused on certain things in their lives a lot. How interesting it is that so often it's stuff that they really don't like that much. And to give some examples, people who are focused on, all the various externalities, the entertainment industry, the news, politics, world events, all these things that usually there are very few people who focus, for instance, on world events, and what they're looking for is all the kitten and puppy stories. They're actually looking at the war in Ukraine and all the latest famine and there was a terrorist attack, and they're looking at all the stuff that they don't like, and they're like glued to it, absolutely glued to it. Yeah. So I think about that in the context of, well, we aren't really good at focusing. And I say, well, yeah, we are. We just aren't good at discerning what we want to focus on.
I also think that goes a little bit, at least in line with what I'm trying to do, is you focus on something. Well, what you're saying is like that we're just so inundated with negativity all the time, and we feel like the world is about to end every 2 days. So we feel like we have to, in order to get some sense of control, we start focusing on that. But I also think that part of the reason that we're not focusing well on things is because we're not focusing on the things we want to be focusing on. We're not like listening to what is coming from deep down inside.
Yeah.
We push it to the side usually, whether it's little, whether it's like take a walk, go outside, sit in the grass. We ignore that to move forward towards something that will, glean productivity. That is the end result of the society we're living in right now. If it's not productive, why focus on it? We forget that there's so much more than just that, but our value as people has been like almost diminished to you're valuable if you're productive. And so we don't focus on the things that really give us true joy because we feel like we don't have the time for it.
And along that same line, one of the things I've noticed in my own life recently, just because of changes that have been going on, is now that I have opportunities that I really didn't have before to shift my focus any way I want to, not be so worried about, like you say, the productivity focus. Is how productive is this to whatever it is I'm trying to do in my life? The more that I find myself not having to be tied to that so much, the less that I find that I actually know what I want to focus on. I think partly because for so many years I was focused on, is it productive? But you take that away and all of a sudden, I have choices. What do I do with them?
Yeah. And if you're not used to living that way, it is probably difficult. You're just I have so much time on my hands. Like, what do I do with my time? But I think time is meant to be enjoyed. Like we're meant to coexist with it, not let it have control over us and dictate whether or not we're allowed to, do the little things, whatever that means. Like it's different for everybody, of course, but if it's like go to the zoo, if that's what's fun for you, or walk outside, take a sip of water and really enjoy that sip of water. To me, the core, at least what it means, being spiritual to me really means being very, very present in the moment that we're in and really, I wouldn't even say enjoying it, but like really experiencing it.
Yeah. Well, enjoying is going to be a part of it.
Yeah. I think that comes with it. Once you are able to experience it, then you might learn to enjoy it.
There's a word that is following me around at the moment, and the word is sacred. what is sacred to you? I mean, people don't even think about that as that word anymore. It's like it's been thrown out the window completely. But what is sacred to you? And it's something that I'm really, really looking at the moment in my own life.
Yeah, I think that's a profound question to ask. People don't take the time, like you said, to move into that space.
Of course, it also raises
the
the
other
question.
Word that's.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. So the other word that's following me around at the moment is grace. And I'm looking at grace at the moment in terms of the oil or the fluidness, the ability to move or make things run smoother or easier. Sorry, I'm just throwing that out at the moment.
No, that's been a big one for me too. I think grace is actually what we talked about earlier was judgment. I think grace is the opposite of judgment in some ways. Maybe a little bit different.
And when you don't judge, things are more fluid and they do flow easier, etc.
Yes.
Very true.
Yes.
Never really put those two opposite to each other, grace and judgment. That's interesting.
They may not be direct opposites. I'm just thinking of when we judge ourselves, we're always so hard on ourselves. It's always like, why didn't the inner critic comes out? Why did you do things like this? Why did you do it like this? But when we choose to give grace, it's more of, oh, it's okay. I did this and I learned from it, or I didn't learn from it, and maybe I won't ever do it again, whatever the experience might be. But it happened and it's fine, and we can move on. Just the acceptance. I see that grace and acceptance.
Yeah, I've got the feeling that I'd never ask myself anymore why I do something. I'm so aware or clear about where I'm going, what I believe, and what I'm doing, that immediately as I'm saying it or doing it, I know I'm doing it. So that question doesn't sit and linger around or worry me at all. I mean, I know why I do things.
Yeah.
And I think the whole thing about awareness is that you really understand while you're doing them.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've been very self-aware from a relatively young age. So hopefully for you, fluidity and grace it's like a hand in hand and part of your life. You don't have just like
I wish.
Dream ultimately.
Yeah, you can always get better and better and better, and that's something that I've learned along the way. Is that if you're happy all the time, you have no idea that you're happy.
No, very
it's
true.
Impossible to perceive it. So you really understand and start appreciating the contrast in life, and the contrast mentally appears as when you know what you don't want, you have a better idea what you do want.
Yes, completely. I mean, without the contrast, without duality and contrast, nothing exists. Like nothing would actually be what it is, I think.
Yeah, but a lot of people say, I just want to be happy. I'm like, yeah, and then?
Yep. Very, very true. We're kind of running out of time, I'm realizing, and we need to get a couple of housekeeping chores done here. They aren't chores, actually. They're actually wonderful things. But we first of all, somebody who's listening in and is liking what they're hearing as they're listening to you, Ruhina, they want to reach out. They want to find out about you and your offerings, your coaching, and so forth. How do they find you?
Yeah, I'm relatively easy to find. My website is ruhinamehra.com. That's RuhinaMehra.com. I'm also on Instagram if there are any folks in the social media age. Ruhina Mehra Coaching, that's my handle. I'm still working on getting myself out there to the rest of social media. It's been a slow progress. That was me like fighting it, and then finally, okay, I accepted one. I'm trying to accept like the rest of social media, but we'll probably get there in time. But yeah, that's where you can find me right now. Instagram and my website, and I offer one-on-one coaching containers to anyone who's interested in starting to work with me. I start off working with people for a 3-month time frame, and if anyone wants to continue, of course, we can keep going. I find that most results start happening a little bit post 3 months, but I don't want to push people into something that they're not maybe ready for yet.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Yeah. So good stuff. Something else I also want to share with you that I've made it a practice for it's almost a year now that I've been doing this, and I'm really enjoying adding this in toward the end of the program each time. But everybody who's appearing on this program, in one way or another, they're wanting to give to the rest of society, usually out of something that they've learned for themselves. They say, "Wow, I got to share this with everybody else," and so they become a coach or a teacher, or they engage in a career that helps to share it through a business or something along that line. And with people who are givers, I mean, you were mentioning social media. There's an example of how the giving often happens because you're putting stuff out there. You're putting content. You got to put the content out there into the social media, and that content gets consumed by many people you've never met, you've never seen, you never will meet, you never will see, and you end up helping people that you don't even know that you're helping them. And as a result, we tend to kind of skip past that. So I like to stop everything and point out, you've been doing that for quite some time now. You've been helping people you didn't know about. And on behalf of those people, thank you for doing it, because you're playing an important role. You're contributing to life here in this 3D world that we live in, and doing it in a way that is helpful to so many people who you've never met, you've never seen. So on their behalf, thank you for that. And thank you for continuing to do it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for your perspective, which I think is really important, because sometimes we're so prone to seeing the bad side of things or the difficult side of things. But right, like the reason I'm doing this, and a lot of us are doing this, is because we just want to help people and hopefully make things better in the world. So yeah, thank you.
All right. So thank you very much. And Louis, as usual, wonderful perspective. I love the things that you bring here to the program. So thank you very much for that. Anne-Marie, of course, we'll be back next time. Yep. And thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Take care, everybody.